The auditorium fell silent. Jake Morrison stood on stage, his promotion certificate trembling in his hands, as his mother's voice cut through the celebration like a knife. "You don't deserve this. Everything you have is because of us." 300 colleagues stared in horror. But then the CEO stepped forward, took the microphone, and said 6 words that shattered everything Jake thought he knew. "I think it's time for truth." Jake Morrison had spent 29 years trying to be enough. Enough for his parents, enough for his older brother David's shadow, enough to justify his existence in a family that treated him like a permanent disappointment. He was a software engineer turned innovation strategist at TechVision Corp, one of Seattle's fastest-growing tech companies. He had worked 80-hour weeks for 5 years, revolutionized their product development pipeline, and led teams that generated $40 million in new revenue. Today was supposed to be his vindication, the day he became Vice President of Innovation, the youngest VP in company history. Instead, it became the day his entire life exploded in front of everyone who mattered. If you've ever been told you're not good enough by the people who should support you most, hit that subscribe button right now. Because what happens next will show you that sometimes the truth is more powerful than any lie your family ever told you. This story will leave you speechless, so make sure you're subscribed because you need to see how this ends. The ceremony had started perfectly. TechVision's Seattle headquarters occupied the top 15 floors of a glass tower overlooking Puget Sound, all sleek design and innovation culture. The main auditorium on the 20th floor was packed with employees, executives, and a few family members invited to celebrate major promotions. Jake had hesitated about inviting his parents, Linda and Robert Morrison, but his therapist had encouraged him to try one more time to include them in his success. His brother David, 33, hadn't bothered to attend, claiming a business conflict in San Francisco, where he worked as a consultant. Jake had learned long ago not to expect support from David. The CEO of TechVision, Caroline Chen, was a formidable woman in her 50s who had built the company from a startup in her garage to a billion-dollar enterprise. She stood at the podium, describing Jake's accomplishments with genuine pride. "Jake Morrison joined us 5 years ago as a junior software engineer," she said, her voice carrying through the excellent sound system. "In that time, he's transformed how we approach product development. His predictive analytics framework has become industry standard. His leadership during the CloudSync crisis saved us from catastrophic failure. He embodies everything TechVision stands for: innovation, integrity, and relentless excellence. It's my honor to promote him to Vice President of Innovation, effective immediately." The applause was thunderous. Jake's colleagues stood, cheering. His direct reports, the team he'd built and mentored, were whistling and shouting congratulations. Jake felt emotion tightening his throat as he accepted the Crystal Award and the promotion letter. This was it, the validation he'd been chasing. He had made it. He belonged. He was enough. Then he saw his parents in the back row, and his mother's face told him everything he needed to know. Linda Morrison wasn't smiling. She looked angry, her lips pressed into a thin line, her arms crossed tightly. His father Robert sat beside her, looking uncomfortable but resigned. The expression Jake had seen his entire life when his mother was about to cause a scene. Jake's stomach dropped. "No, not here, not now. Please." But Linda Morrison had never been good at reading rooms or caring about her son's feelings. As Jake began his acceptance speech, thanking his team and the company, his mother stood up. The movement caught attention, heads turning toward the back of the auditorium. "Excuse me," Linda's voice rang out, sharp and accusatory. "I have something to say." Caroline Chen frowned, clearly caught off guard. Jake froze at the podium, his prepared remarks dying in his throat. His mother pushed past other attendees in her row, moving toward the center aisle. Robert followed reluctantly, trying to grab her arm, but she shook him off. "Mom, please," Jake said into the microphone, his voice barely steady. "This isn't the time." "Isn't the time?" Linda repeated, her voice rising. "When is the time, Jake? When you've completely forgotten where you came from? Who got you here?" The auditorium was dead silent now. 300 people watching a family drama unfold with horrified fascination. Jake's face burned with humiliation. This was his nightmare, the thing he'd feared most, being exposed as a fraud in front of everyone he respected. "You all think Jake is some self-made success story," Linda continued, addressing the room like she was making a prosecution case. "But the truth is, everything he has is because of his brother David. David Morrison works at Apex Consulting, one of the most prestigious firms in San Francisco. David went to Stanford. David has connections throughout the tech industry. Jake only got into TechVision because David made phone calls, pulled strings, opened doors. Without David, Jake would be nothing. And this promotion?" She gestured dismissively at the award Jake was clutching like a lifeline. "This is nepotism, pure and simple. Jake doesn't deserve this. He never has. He's riding on his brother's coattails and taking credit for other people's work. The words hit Jake like physical blows. He stood there, publicly humiliated, unable to form a coherent response. His mind raced through possibilities. Should he defend himself? Should he leave the stage? Should he call security? But he was paralyzed by the sheer audacity of what was happening, by the cruelty of his own mother sabotaging his greatest achievement. Robert Morrison looked miserable but said nothing, offering no defense of his younger son. He never had. That was the dynamic Jake had grown up with. Linda attacking, Robert enabling through silence, David being praised, and Jake being diminished. Then Caroline Chen did something Jake would remember for the rest of his life. She walked calmly to the podium, gently took the microphone from Jake's numb hands, and smiled at him with an expression that somehow communicated both sympathy and steel. "Mrs. Morrison," Caroline said, her voice perfectly controlled, professional, with an edge that could cut glass. "I appreciate your passion. But I think there's been a significant misunderstanding. Perhaps we should clear it up right now, in front of everyone, so there's no confusion going forward." Linda looked momentarily uncertain, sensing danger but too committed to back down. "There's no misunderstanding. I know what my sons have accomplished. David has always been the achiever, the one who makes things happen. Jake just follows along." Caroline's smile didn't waver, but her eyes were cold. "I see. Well, let me share some facts with you, Mrs. Morrison. Facts that are documented, verified, and absolutely indisputable. When Jake Morrison applied to TechVision 5 years ago, he went through our standard recruitment process. We use blind hiring for initial screening, which means all identifying information, including names, is removed from applications. The hiring committee that selected Jake had no idea who his family was, who his brother was, or what connections he might have. They selected him purely based on his technical skills, his problem-solving abilities, and his innovative approach to challenges. The auditorium was riveted. Jake felt like he was watching this happen to someone else, like he'd stepped outside his own body. Caroline continued, her voice growing stronger. "Furthermore, I personally verified Jake's background when we were considering him for promotion. I wanted to understand his full story, so I did something unusual. I reached out to Apex Consulting in San Francisco, where you claim his brother David works, and has all these influential connections." She paused, and Jake saw something flash across his mother's face. "Fear, Mrs. Morrison," Caroline said softly. "David Morrison has never worked at Apex Consulting. In fact, when I spoke with their HR department, they had no record of anyone named David Morrison ever applying, interviewing, or being employed there. So I'm very curious about these connections and phone calls he supposedly made on Jake's behalf. Because according to my investigation, they never happened. Your son Jake earned his position here through his own merit, his own hard work, and his own exceptional talent. Nobody opened doors for him. He built his own doors. And if you've been telling him otherwise for 5 years, then you've been lying to him." The silence that followed was absolute. Jake stared at Caroline, his brain struggling to process what she'd just said. David didn't work at Apex Consulting. David hadn't made phone calls. David hadn't opened doors. It was all a lie. Everything his parents had told him, every time they'd diminished his achievements by crediting David, every moment they'd made him feel like a fraud who didn't deserve his success, it had all been based on lies. His mother's face had gone from angry to pale, her mouth opening and closing without sound. His father looked like he wanted to disappear through the floor. Caroline wasn't finished. "In fact, Mrs. Morrison, I have something else to share with you and everyone here. Something that came to my attention last week when our security team flagged some concerning communications." She pulled out her phone, tapped the screen, and the large display behind the stage lit up with an email exchange. Jake turned to look, and what he saw made his blood run cold. The emails were from his mother's account. They were addressed to various TechVision executives, including members of the board of directors, and they were attempting to sabotage Jake's promotion. "As you can see," Caroline narrated, 3 weeks ago, Mrs. Morrison began emailing our leadership, claiming that Jake had fabricated his credentials, that he was mentally unstable, that he had stolen intellectual property from his brother, and that promoting him would expose the company to legal liability. She threatened to go public with these allegations. She demanded that we not only refuse his promotion, but terminate his employment entirely. Jake felt sick. His own mother had tried to destroy his career, not just passively, not just through criticism, but actively, maliciously, with calculated intent to ruin everything he'd built. "Why?" he whispered, though the microphone caught it, broadcasting his pain to the entire room. "Why would you do this?" Linda found her voice, but it came out defensive and shrill. "Because you don't deserve it. You've always been mediocre, Jake. Always second-rate. David is the talented one, the special one. You're just ordinary, and seeing you get recognition that should go to him, seeing you praised when he's struggling, it's not right. It's not fair." There it was. The truth beneath the lies. The poison that had infected his entire childhood. His mother couldn't stand seeing him succeed because in her twisted worldview, there was only room for one son to shine, and she had decided decades ago that son would be David. Jake's success was a threat to that narrative, so it had to be undermined, minimized, or destroyed. "You tried to get me fired," Jake said slowly, the realization settling over him like ice water. "Because you couldn't handle me being successful. Because it means you were wrong about me my entire life." Robert finally spoke, his voice weak. "Linda, we should go." "No," Jake said, finding strength he didn't know he had. "No, you don't get to leave. Not until everyone here knows the whole truth." "Caroline, is there more? What do you think Jake should do? Should he forgive his parents? Or is there no coming back from this betrayal? Drop truth in the comments if you think he deserves answers. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now, because what happens next will absolutely shock you." Caroline nodded grimly. "Unfortunately, yes. After receiving these emails, we conducted a full investigation. We discovered that Mrs. Morrison had also contacted several of TechVision's competitors, offering to provide them with confidential information about Jake's projects in exchange for them hiring and promoting David Morrison instead. She claimed she could get access to Jake's files, his research, his proprietary algorithms. That constitutes attempted corporate espionage and intellectual property theft. The screen changed, showing more emails, these to companies like Microsoft, Amazon, and Google. Jake's mother had been shopping his work, his ideas, his innovations to competitors, trying to trade his intellectual property for opportunities for his brother. It was beyond betrayal. It was criminal. "We've already contacted the FBI," Caroline continued. "They're investigating the full scope of the attempted theft. We've also obtained a restraining order preventing both Mr. and Mrs. Morrison from coming within 500 feet of TechVision property or contacting any TechVision employees, including Jake, without his explicit permission." Security guards appeared at the back of the auditorium, moving purposefully toward Jake's parents. Linda looked panicked now, her earlier righteousness evaporating. "You can't do this! Jake, tell them. Tell them I was just trying to help the family." "Help the family?" Jake repeated, his voice breaking. "You tried to destroy my career. You tried to steal my work. You've spent my entire life telling me I'm not good enough, that everything I achieve is really because of David, and it was all lies. David doesn't even work where you said he does. What else have you lied about? What else have you destroyed?" Linda's face crumpled, but Jake felt no sympathy. He thought about every award ceremony where she'd found something to criticize, every promotion where she'd credited someone else, every achievement she'd minimized, every dream she'd called unrealistic. 29 years of systematic emotional destruction, and now he knew it had been deliberate, calculated, and malicious. The security guards reached his parents. "Mr. and Mrs. Morrison, you need to come with us." Robert went quietly, looking defeated. Linda tried one last desperate appeal. "Jake, please. I'm your mother. You can't do this to your own mother." Jake looked at her, really looked at her, and saw a stranger. A cruel, bitter woman who had poisoned his entire childhood because she couldn't love both her sons equally. "You're not my mother," he said quietly. "A mother supports her children. A mother celebrates their success. A mother doesn't try to destroy them. I don't know what you are, but you're not my mother anymore." They were escorted out, Linda protesting loudly until the auditorium doors closed behind them. The silence that followed felt surreal. 300 people had just witnessed the most intimate, painful moment of Jake's life. He should have been mortified. Instead, he felt something unexpected. Relief. The truth was out. No more pretending, no more trying to win approval from people who would never give it. Caroline returned to his side, placing a supportive hand on his shoulder. "I'm sorry you had to learn this way," she said softly, though the microphone still broadcast to the room. "But I couldn't let them keep hurting you with lies. You deserve to know that everything you've accomplished here is real. You earned it. You're one of the most talented people I've ever worked with, and I'm honored to have you as our Vice President of Innovation." The applause started slowly, then built into a standing ovation. His colleagues were cheering not just for his promotion, but for his survival, for his vindication. Jake felt tears on his face and didn't care. For the first time in his life, he felt genuinely seen, genuinely valued, genuinely enough. The promotion ceremony concluded with an impromptu celebration that felt more like a support rally. Colleagues approached Jake throughout the evening, sharing their own stories of toxic families, of parents who couldn't celebrate success, of siblings who were unfairly favored. He wasn't alone. He had never been alone. He just hadn't known where to look for his real family. That night, sitting in his apartment overlooking Elliott Bay, Jake finally let himself process everything. His phone was exploding with messages. Some were from colleagues offering support. Some were from friends who had heard about the incident. But several were from his brother David, and those were the ones Jake opened with trepidation. "Jake, I just heard what happened. I don't even know what to say. I'm so sorry. Mom called me, completely hysterical. She said you had her arrested. What's going on? Can you call me? I need to understand what's happening." Jake stared at those messages for a long time before responding. "Did you know?" he typed. "Did you know Mom was telling me you got me my job? Did you know she was lying about Apex Consulting? Did you know she tried to sabotage my promotion?" The response came quickly. "Can we talk? Not over text. Please?" They arranged a video call. When David's face appeared on the screen, Jake was struck by how tired his brother looked, how much older than 33. "I didn't know about the emails or the sabotage," David said immediately. "I swear to you, Jake, I had no idea she was doing that. But the other stuff..." He paused, looking guilty. "I knew she was exaggerating my success to you. I knew she told you I worked at Apex when I actually work at a much smaller consulting firm. And I let her do it because it was easier than confronting her. I'm sorry." Jake felt a complicated mix of anger and understanding. Why does she do this? Why does she need me to be a failure so badly? David sighed, running his hands through his hair. "I've been in therapy for 2 years trying to figure that out. My therapist thinks it's about control. Mom needs to be the center of everything, the architect of all success in the family. When you succeeded independently, without her help, without even her approval, it threatened her entire identity. She couldn't accept that you didn't need her, so she created this narrative where you were secretly dependent on me, and I was secretly dependent on her. It kept her in control." "That's insane," Jake said flatly. "Yeah," David agreed. "It really is. And I'm sorry I played along. I was weak. I liked being the favorite, liked not being the target of her manipulation. But that meant you were the target instead, and that was wrong. I should have protected you. I should have stood up for you. I didn't, and I'm sorry. It wasn't enough, not nearly enough, but it was a start." "Did she really try to sell my work to competitors?" Jake asked. David nodded miserably. "She called me last week, asking if I had contacts at Google. She wanted me to set up meetings where she could share exciting innovations that Jake was too naive to monetize properly. I told her no, told her that was crazy, and probably illegal. She got mad and hung up on me. I didn't know she'd do it anyway." Jake felt exhausted. "I can't have her in my life anymore, David. I know she's your mother too, but I'm done. I'm done being made to feel worthless. I'm done with the lies and the manipulation. I'm done." "I understand," David said quietly. For what it's worth, I think you're making the right choice. Dad called me too. He's devastated, but he knows Mom went too far this time. He's talking about separation, maybe divorce. He's tired too. That surprised Jake. His father had always been so passive, so willing to go along with Linda's treatment of Jake. Good, Jake said, surprising himself with the vehemence. He should have left her years ago. He should have protected me. He didn't. Now he gets to live with that. They talked for another hour, slowly unpacking decades of family dysfunction. David admitted he'd struggled with the pressure of being the perfect son, that he'd developed anxiety and depression, trying to live up to their mother's impossible expectations. He'd been in therapy, on medication, barely holding his life together, while Linda told everyone he was thriving. The irony was brutal. Linda had destroyed both her sons in different ways, one through excessive pressure, one through systematic diminishment. "Can we try to be brothers?" David asked at the end of the call. "Real brothers, not whatever Mom made us into?" "I know I have to earn your trust back, but I'd like to try." Jake considered it. "Maybe, eventually, but I need space right now. I need to figure out who I am without all this poison. Can you understand that?" "Yeah," David said. "Take all the time you need. I'll be here when you're ready." They ended the call, and Jake sat in the darkness of his apartment, feeling strangely empty. So much had been revealed, so much destroyed. But underneath the devastation, there was something else. Possibility. For the first time in his life, he wasn't carrying the weight of his mother's disapproval, wasn't trying to prove himself to people who would never be satisfied. He was free. The freedom was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. This is the turning point. Everything changes from here. Stay tuned because you need to see what Jake does next. Make sure you're subscribed because this ending will restore your faith in standing up for yourself. The legal fallout was swift and comprehensive. The FBI investigation into Linda Morrison's attempted theft of intellectual property moved quickly. She had left a clear digital trail. Emails to competitors, detailed descriptions of Jake's proprietary work, explicit offers to provide confidential documents. Federal prosecutors charged her with attempted corporate espionage, attempted theft of trade secrets, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Each charge carried potential prison time. Robert Morrison, while not directly involved in the corporate espionage, faced charges related to his knowledge and failure to report his wife's activities. Jake learned that his father had known about some of Linda's emails but had been too afraid or too passive to stop her. That passive complicity cost him. He was charged as an accessory after the fact and faced probation and fines even if he avoided prison time. TechVision's legal team was ruthless in pursuit of justice. They filed a massive civil suit against Linda for damages, calculated based on the value of the intellectual property she had attempted to sell and the potential harm to the company's competitive position. The figure was staggering. $15 million. They had no expectation of collecting anywhere near that amount, but the suit served multiple purposes. It sent a message that intellectual property theft would be prosecuted aggressively. It provided legal grounds to ensure Linda could never work in tech or any related field. And it gave Jake official documented vindication that he was the victim, not the villain in this story. His mother had tried to frame it as a family dispute, as an overreaction to a mother's concern. The $15 million lawsuit made clear this was serious criminal activity. The trial took place 6 months later. Jake attended every day, sitting in the courtroom watching his mother try to defend the indefensible. Her lawyer attempted a defense based on mental health issues, claiming Linda suffered from narcissistic personality disorder and couldn't fully appreciate the impact of her actions. The prosecution presented expert testimony that mental illness didn't excuse deliberate, calculated criminal behavior over an extended period. Linda took the stand in her own defense, and Jake watched her try to manipulate the jury the way she had manipulated him his entire life. She cried, claimed she was only trying to protect her sons. insisted she didn't understand tech industry rules about intellectual property. The prosecutor destroyed her on cross-examination, showing email after email where she clearly demonstrated understanding of what she was doing, where she negotiated terms and discussed payment for stolen information. She had known exactly what she was doing. She just hadn't cared. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours, guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced Linda Morrison to 4 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation. Robert, who took a plea deal and testified against his wife, received 2 years of probation and community service. The civil suit was settled for a fraction of the original amount, but still resulted in the forced sale of Jake's parents' house and most of their assets. They lost everything they had built over 40 years of marriage, destroyed by Linda's inability to accept her son's independent success. Jake felt no satisfaction watching his mother being led away in handcuffs. He felt sad, empty, grieving for the mother he had always wanted, but never actually had. In her final statement to the court, Linda had looked at Jake and said, "You did this. You destroyed our family." But Jake knew better. He hadn't destroyed anything. He had simply refused to keep pretending, refused to keep accepting abuse as love. The media coverage was intense. Tech VP's mother, charged with corporate espionage, ran in major outlets. The story had everything: family drama, corporate intrigue, a David and Goliath narrative with Jake as the unlikely hero standing up to parental abuse. Jake received hundreds of messages from people sharing their own stories of toxic parents, of families that couldn't celebrate success, of siblings who were unfairly compared. He realized his story had touched a nerve, had given voice to thousands of people who had been made to feel less than by the people who should have loved them most. TechVision handled the publicity brilliantly, positioning Jake as a symbol of meritocracy and integrity. Caroline Chen gave interviews emphasizing that Jake's talent had always been evident, that the company stood behind him completely, that they were proud to have leadership who maintained ethical standards even under extreme family pressure. Jake's professional reputation, which could have been destroyed by his mother's allegations, was instead enhanced. He became known as the VP who survived attempted sabotage and came out stronger. 18 months after the promotion ceremony that changed everything, Jake stood once again in the TechVision auditorium. This time, he was giving a keynote speech at the company's annual Innovation Summit. His topic, Finding Success Without Validation. He looked out at the audience of over 1,000 people, employees and industry leaders, and felt calm. "I used to think success meant finally getting approval from the people who mattered," Jake began. "My parents, my family, the voices that had told me I wasn't good enough for as long as I could remember. I thought if I could just achieve enough, do enough, be enough, they would finally see my value. What I learned, in the most painful way possible, is that some people will never give you that validation. Not because you're not worthy, but because they're incapable of seeing worth that doesn't serve their narrative." He shared his story, not all the details, but the essence. Family members who undermined rather than supported, the discovery of lies designed to diminish his achievements, the choice between accepting toxicity or choosing himself. "The hardest thing I've ever done," he said, "was accepting that my mother would never be proud of me. Not because I wasn't accomplished enough, but because my success threatened her sense of control. That wasn't my failing. It was hers. Learning that distinction saved my life." The speech received a standing ovation. Afterward, dozens of people approached him, some with tears in their eyes, thanking him for giving voice to experiences they thought were uniquely shameful. Jake realized that his mother's attempt to humiliate him publicly had actually created an opportunity to help others feel less alone. There was a kind of poetic justice in that. David had kept his promise to give Jake space, reaching out only occasionally with messages that made no demands, just offered continued apologies and support when Jake was ready. Finally, Jake was ready. They met for coffee in Seattle, the first time they'd seen each other in person since before the ceremony. The conversation was awkward at first, both brothers navigating new territory. They weren't the roles their mother had assigned them anymore. Weren't golden child and scapegoat. They were just two men trying to figure out how to be brothers without a toxic parent defining their relationship. "I saw your keynote speech," David said. "It was powerful. I'm proud of you, Jake. I should have said that years ago, but I'm saying it now. I'm proud of the man you've become, despite everything that was done to you." Jake felt emotion tightening his throat. Those words, "I'm proud of you," had carried so much weight for so long. Hearing them from David, freely given without manipulation or agenda, felt like healing. "Thanks," he managed. "How are you doing? Really?" David smiled sadly. "I'm in therapy twice a week. I quit the consulting job, actually. Turns out I was only doing it because Mom wanted me in business. I'm going back to school for teaching. I want to work with kids, help them feel valued. Maybe make up for the damage our family did." "That's really great," Jake said, and meant it. They talked for hours, slowly rebuilding something that had been broken before it ever had a chance to be real. It wouldn't be easy, and there would always be scars. But for the first time, Jake felt like he had a brother, not a competitor, not a weapon used against him, but an actual brother. Jake's life rebuilt itself in unexpected ways. He threw himself into his work with new passion, no longer driven by desperate need for validation, but by genuine love of innovation. His team flourished, his projects succeeded, and his reputation in the industry grew. He started dating again, something he'd neglected during years of being too exhausted from family drama to open his heart. He met Sarah, a pediatric surgeon with her own history of complicated family dynamics. They understood each other in ways that felt effortless and right. He went back to therapy, processing decades of emotional abuse and learning to recognize healthy relationships versus toxic ones. He set boundaries, said no when he needed to, and stopped apologizing for taking up space. He built a chosen family from friends, colleagues, and eventually David, people who celebrated his success without needing to diminish him. His mother served 3 years of her sentence before being released on parole. She never apologized, never acknowledged wrongdoing beyond what the legal system forced her to admit. She sent Jake one letter from prison, full of self-pity and veiled accusations. He read it once, felt sad for the woman who would never understand what she had destroyed, and filed it away. He didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. His father reached out more frequently, always tentative, always apologizing. Jake maintained limited contact, enough to know Robert was trying to rebuild his life, but not enough to allow him back into a position where his passive enabling could cause harm again. Forgiveness was complicated. Jake forgave his father for being weak, but he didn't forget. Some relationships couldn't be fully restored, and Jake made peace with that. 3 years after the promotion ceremony, TechVision announced Jake's appointment as Chief Innovation Officer, a new C-suite position created specifically for him. Caroline Chen was retiring, and while she wouldn't be CEO anymore, she made sure Jake's contributions would be recognized at the highest level. At the announcement press conference, a journalist asked Jake about his family, about the dramatic public confrontation that had become tech industry legend. Jake smiled, calm and confident in a way he never could have been before. "I learned that family isn't defined by blood," he said. "It's defined by who shows up for you, who celebrates your success, who tells you the truth even when it's hard. My real family is here at TechVision, and in the friends I've chosen. As for the rest, I wish them well, but they're not part of my story anymore. I get to write my own story now, and it's a good one." That answer went viral, shared across social media by thousands of people who understood exactly what he meant. Jake Morrison became, accidentally, a symbol of breaking free from toxic family dynamics, of choosing yourself when the people who should love you can't or won't. He never sought that role, but he accepted it with grace, using his platform to encourage others to set boundaries, seek therapy, and understand that family was a verb, not a noun. Family was what you did, not what you were born into. On quiet evenings, Jake sometimes thought about his mother, wondered if she ever understood what she'd lost. He doubted it. People like Linda Morrison rarely achieve that kind of self-awareness. But Jake had learned something crucial. He didn't need her to understand. Her understanding, her approval, her recognition, none of it mattered anymore. He had found his own worth, built his own success, and created his own family. He had survived, and more than that, he had thrived. That was the real victory, not revenge, not even justice, but simply the freedom to be himself without apology. The promotion ceremony that was supposed to humiliate him had instead liberated him. And for that, in a strange way he could never have predicted, he was grateful. So what do you think? Did Jake make the right choice cutting off his toxic family? Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and your own well-being? Share your story in the comments below. If this resonated with you, if you've ever felt not good enough because of people who should have supported you, drop a comment, and let's build a community of people who chose themselves. And don't forget to subscribe because there are so many more powerful stories coming your way. Hit that bell icon so you never miss an upload. Remember, you are enough, exactly as you are, and anyone who can't see that doesn't deserve space in your life. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.